Oh, hey, ladies and gentlemen, really appreciate you coming by for this session. My name is Jeff Worthington. We'll talk about essentially cloud security. Now, I will start at exactly 10 after, so we're going to get going because I have 20 minutes. You know, as a retired 06, you never give an 06 or above only 20 minutes to talk because they can talk for about an hour and a half. Obviously, we have someone who's been in the room for an 06 talking. But as I said, my name is Jeff Worthington. I got about 4 years ago, retired as a colonel from the Army. Did my last tour at Joint Special Operations Command as the J6 there. Hey, I will not give you a product pitch. That's absolutely not what I do at CrowdStrike. I will provide you a situational update. I will give you some courses of action you can potentially take to secure clouds, but there is only one slide in here that is a CrowdStrike, I'll say, branded slide with our solution on there, and I even took the words off of it as much as I could, because I just don't want to do that. I will, however, challenge you. So CrowdStrike, if you haven't heard about us, global company, we are the leading cybersecurity pure play company on the globe, well over 150 million sensors out there that we're protecting. And so I would challenge you, because I did this earlier, and I decided in ChatGPT 4.0 to go ahead and type in the prompt, what is the best vendor for cloud security? And so a list of vendors came up there. I'll tell you CrowdStrike was the first one listed, and strengths and weaknesses of all the others. And then it said, so what environment are you talking about? Is it public sector? Is it healthcare? And I said, what's the best for the DoD? What is the best for the DoD? CrowdStrike came up number one again. And in fact, it said the strengths really articulate to what the DoD's environment is. It's the DoD's environment that I remember. So we'll talk about this stuff right here, and then we'll get to some solutions. So I pulled up some of the, I'll say, leading cloud environment attacks over the past couple of years. I really want you to focus on the top left and the bottom right. So on the top left one there, that really affected the DoD because for about a week or two, depending upon what news story you read, about 25,000 service members' information was leaked onto the web because of an Azure server that had no password on it. About a year later, all of you in uniform that were affected found out. A year later, you found out that your data was lost onto the internet somewhere. And then the bottom right one there, now that upper left was China. The bottom right is Russia. And so on the bottom right one, you see November to January. So I think it's actually in February-ish or so, but it was a password spraying attack by the Chinese. So they tried some passwords, they found a weak one. It says a vendor laptop there. You can determine what vendor you believe that was, but they got into a test environment in a vendor's laptop, transitioned over to the production environment on that vendor, and then exfiltrated a number of emails from some significant leaders inside that vendor. So the problem is not going away, it's only getting worse. So at CrowdStrike, I think it's important, like in the military, we start with a situation paragraph. Who's my enemy? Enemy forces, what am I going against? So at CrowdStrike, we bin them into three categories. You have your nation state on the left, your e-criminal actors in the middle, and then your hacktivists on the right. So your nation states, they're your big 5 or 6 now, depending on which country you talk about. China, Russia, North Korea, Iran. Number of countries, number of nation states are growing. Now, what's their motivation? It's all those D words: deny, disrupt, degrade. They are there to ensure that they inflict a cost on you that is greater than you can inflict on them, and to prevent you from accomplishing your task. The e-criminal actors, primarily, they are there for a monetary gain. They want to get in quick and get out. You'll see some stats in here that we track e-criminal actors because they're very fast. They're usually very noisy, but they're very fast. And then the hacktivists on the right-hand side, now those are the ones that have a political bent. They have an agenda. They want to do something. They want to deface a website. They want to cause mistrust or distrust in a government. We certainly saw that during the beginning of the war over in Israel and Gaza, certainly with things going on in Iran and in the Middle East. So at CrowdStrike, we track a number of adversaries. This is actually taken off our global threat hunting report, which just came out a few weeks ago, as opposed to our global threat report, which came out in February. Now, since February to now, our increase in actors have gone up by, I think it's 14. Yeah, 14 new adversaries in the past 6 months that we've seen. In fact, we're on record to outpace the number of new adversaries that we have seen on the networks by the end of this year. What's very concerning, however, are the number of nation states that are growing. So Egypt, Kazakhstan. This past year, we've seen a nation state actor affiliated with Belarus. So you consider they're also affiliated with the Russians. What is bad, though, in the past couple of years is that we now see nation state actors misrepresenting themselves as e-criminal actors, or e-criminal actors working with nation-state actors and hacktivists. So you see this blend. They are, just like we do joint coalition operations, they are now moving into joint coalition operations. So some stats right here that I want you to take away. There's a number of different ones, and if you can read them, that's great. If you can't in the back of the room, certainly take a picture of it. They are all in our global threat report and the threat hunting report. As the slide builds, I don't want to get too far. But what I really want you to take away for this message, though, is the bottom left-hand corner of the screen there. And those are the stats that are regarding all the cloud intrusions, cloud issues that we're seeing. Now, there are 110% increase of the past year of those actors that know they're getting into a cloud environment. Before, it was someone that stumbled upon it, didn't know that they were there. Well, now that's doubled the number of actors that now know they're in a cloud environment. And why is that important? Because they know exactly how to take advantage of your cloud environment. In fact, when I started our cloud stuff at JSOC, we really didn't know what we were doing. I'll admit it. We were running into the dark in the middle of the night with our eyes closed and scissors in both of our hands because we weren't really sure. But the adversary today doesn't have that problem. They know exactly what they're looking for. The middle slide there, you see 75% year-over-year growth in cloud intrusions. I'll mention later, but if identity is the new way of getting in, cloud is the new battleground. That's absolutely where they're going to meet you on the field of battle. And then the 136%, now that's a new stat from a couple of weeks ago. Just in the first 6 months of this year, we have seen a 136% increase in those cloud actors that are out there operating on cloud environments. So that they know exactly where you've been told to move to. They know more about your cloud infrastructure than you do, and they have the time to understand it better than you do because you're fighting that day-to-day, everyday operation. Now, so this slide here highlights just two adversaries. So on the left is Labyrinth Kalima. Now, Labyrinth Kalima is affiliated with the North Korean government. So they are an actor that we have seen over the past year really shown a propensity to attack cloud environments. I wouldn't say they're the worst. In fact, we'll talk later about China. China and Russia are absolutely your two most capable adversaries, China being the one that has outpaced everyone over this past year. And on the right-hand side of the screen, we put Scattered Spider up there. Now, Scattered Spider has been in the news a few years ago. If you may remember, they attacked the MGM Grand in Caesar's Palace, shut them down for a number of days. However much MGM paid for their cybersecurity solution beforehand, I'm sure it was less than the $100 million that it cost them to clean the whole problem up. But Scattered Spider took a hiatus for about a year or so. Now, in the past 2 months, you may have heard of technology, aviation companies being breached and being attacked. Scattered Spider is back in the news. Scattered Spider last year, past couple of years, #1 cloud actor. Absolutely the #1 cloud actor. However, China is the one that is growing. So why is it so hard to secure my cloud? What's the problem? It's obviously not a big deal, right? We have too many siloed tools. On an average, when we talk to organizations, they have about 65 different cybersecurity tools that they're trying to implement. I know my guys and gals in JSOC had no time to swivel between all those different tools. They also lacked the real context of what was going on. I'll talk about cross-domain attacks. Cross-domain attacks on a cloud environment is probably the most dangerous course of action right now. If you can't see what is going on in your endpoint, what is going on in cloud, your identity, the user workload, then you really don't have the full context of what that adversary is doing. And now all of us chased compliance. I know I did. Two vulnerabilities per host. I had to report that all the time. I had to maintain 2 per host. So we're chasing compliance, but that really isn't security. I mean, it absolutely is not. And then lastly on there, we're also trying to innovate at the same time. My last year in JSOC, it was going to be the year of zero trust. We're going to do zero trust. We never could get to zero trust because we were so busy doing so many other things. Not to mention the 8 or 10 people I had to pull off the line to prepare for a CCRI, now a Cora. So we certainly, we cannot get ahead of the adversary. If you looked at the last slide, it's about 48 minutes, the average time to start moving laterally around the network. We have seen them get in a network and start moving as fast as 51 seconds. 51 seconds to log in, figure out they're on an endpoint, and then start moving around using all the same tools that your teams are using. So cloud-conscious adversaries, I mentioned that, about 110% increase. I'll let you look at this slide right here. The biggest problem, though, is that the adversary knows what they're getting into. In fact, they are also counting on you using AI and LLM. We all want to use LLMs, right? Where do we keep them? We keep them on-prem. We absolutely do not keep them on-prem. We keep our LLMs and all of our AI models up in the cloud. They know that. And they're starting to understand where you put them, and they're understanding how to interact with them. And then, can you really trust that LLM when you ask it a question? I personally, maybe because I'm a CrowdStrike employee, I trusted what ChatGPT said to me about 2 hours ago when I typed that prompt in there. But can you trust that LLM that you have put on your own network to answer your most critical questions, to protect the operator that's on the X? Do you want to take that chance of sending an operator onto an objective when you really don't know if you can trust the answer that your AI gave you? And hunting cloud-conscious adversaries is equally as difficult. You see the surge and the rise in the cloud adversaries that are out there. The second number there, the 40%, you see, that's the increase in what we see China doing. So that's why we are tracking China very closely. I'll show you some of the attacks that China has executed, and some of the times that we've had troops in contact. Our team has had troops in contact with the Chinese to try and impose that cost on the adversary to have them move somewhere else. And so this is just an example of an attack. Now, this is China, and it took a little under about a year or so. I think started in March and finished up in May or so when they're finally done with their actions on the objective. But it all started with querying a server that was available on the internet. And they got some credentials, and they got those credentials and they logged in. And they started to see what was going on, and in fact, then they set up their own cloud infrastructure inside this organization's cloud. And they did that in parallel so you wouldn't see them. So they started to harvest more credentials, start to move around the network, exfiltrated the data they needed, and then they went ahead and locked it. And they took a year to do this. It's not like they took 30 days or 24 hours, which we do see adversaries doing, but China, Russia, mostly China and Russia are the ones that are willing to wait the time. We are not. Most of your e-criminal actors, like I said, they want to get in, get out, move on to the next victim, and take their money, steal their data, whatever it is. But this adversary, China, took almost a year to get what they wanted off the network. And it started just by an identity that they got, and then started moving around the cloud environment. Because in this case, the organization had a great understanding of their on-prem architecture, their endpoints, but they really didn't have the correlation from what was going on in the cloud. In fact, I'll tell you, I'll be honest. My on-prem team was on one floor. My cloud team was on a different floor. Now, do they have to be on the same floor? No, but they really didn't talk to each other a lot. And that's what we're seeing are all these disparate teams that are out there that have no good correlation or context. And I don't believe that the Department of Defense has good correlation between their cloud environment, their on-prem environment, their identity provider, and the identity environment to understand what those identities are doing across their networks. And that leads me to the cross-domain attacks. This is not something new. It was something new a few years ago, but this is absolutely what they're doing. They're taking advantage of the fact that you don't have that full context, that full understanding of your entire environment. They will attack identity. They will attack endpoint. They will attack now unmanaged systems and come in through a VoIP phone, a vulnerability in a VoIP phone. They'll come in through a vulnerability in a printer. Yes, what was old is now new again. They're doing the same thing they did about 10 or 15 years ago because they know we've moved on, right? We're doing zero trust, we're doing something else. And we didn't have time to patch that printer or patch that VoIP phone. They're absolutely taking advantage of all these different domains. Much like we do multi-domain operations now, we understand the strength in multi-domain operations. They understand the weakness that we have in our different domains that we have to protect. So this is an example of a cross-domain attack that we witnessed. You notice in the beginning here, it started by identity. So what they did, I think it's a 50%. I'm looking back at one of our engineers. It may be greater than that, but there is a growth in the access brokers that are out there. So you will see an adversary, and all they will do is steal your credentials. They don't want to do anything else. Then they sell them. A couple bucks maybe. They'll sell the credentials. What happened here is the adversary used a credential that they had found, logged into to an endpoint, then pivoted over to the cloud control plane, established some persistence, used some keys that they created, moved around in that environment, jumped back down into on-prem, locked what they wanted, and left. All because of an identity and the lack of context that this organization had on their cloud environment. I have to mention SaaS exploitation because that's extremely important now, and it's something we're seeing. We're all using SaaS tools, right? We're using ServiceNow, which is great. I love ServiceNow. I think it's an awesome tool. 365, maybe you consider it SaaS. I'll probably get the term right, but it's in the cloud. And they're leveraging the fact that we're using SSO credential. So they're stealing SSO credentials. They're getting in the middle of those SSO credentials, then go to your Okta tile, and they'll just start logging into your SaaS environments, and then they'll exploit the information from your SaaS. They will also, if you're concerned about supply chains, I'll tell you, I think it's about 8 or so of the largest DoD federal systems integrators out there are using CrowdStrike. And if your supply chain are your vendors, they're your integrators, then they're protected by CrowdStrike, because you have to be concerned with who is connecting to your network, just like all these SaaS applications. This will only grow, and they will continue to exploit the vulnerabilities in your SharePoint. We saw that here on-prem a few weeks ago, right? The Russians are very good at exploiting vulnerabilities in 365 and Exchange email. And we all know who's using 365 right now and who's using Exchange, not on-prem email, and they're taking advantage of that. So I have to mention China real fast. China, like I said, the biggest adversary that you will see out there, and there's a number of reasons for it, and we have them up there on the screen. But what is most concerning to me is that across all sectors, it's well over 100% increase in Chinese activity. They used to be very noisy. They are no longer noisy. They are very quiet. They're willing to hang out for a long time. They practice great OPSEC right now. If you read our global threat report, we have a term called ORBs, operational relay bots. They're using that for obfuscation. They are setting up infrastructure across the globe, so it makes harder for us to hunt them, to find them, and to eradicate them. But the bottom left or right-hand side of the screen there, that's why the Chinese are so good. Those are Chinese laws, and if you're a Chinese citizen, you're required to report information back to the Chinese Communist Party. Doesn't matter where you live, you can move your Chinese contractors to any country. They're still required by law to report information back to the Chinese Communist Party. They use their universities, much like we have Cyber Patriot and things like that. They take very good use of their universities, of their students that are coming up, of the industries inside their country. It is a whole of state approach when it comes to their offensive cyber operational ability. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel. We have been in contact with them, for lack of a better term, about 330 times this past year. What you see there, though, is that they're everywhere on the globe. They're in almost every country. And what's really important, though, is they're not just sending one team. They are sending specialized teams. There's a technology team that attacks the Western Hemisphere. There is a manufacturing team that attacks another area of the globe. So they're getting very specialized in their teams, just like we are. So when you're going up against a Chinese adversary, you're not going up against a couple people sitting behind a keyboard. You're going against a combined arms team, one team that logs in. Another team moves over to identity. The other team then pivots to cloud and starts to understand your cloud architecture. They are very, very good. And if you don't understand what their TTPs are, then it's very difficult to defend against them. So this is that only slide I mentioned that talks about CrowdStrike. What do you need to protect your environment? Well, on the left-hand side there, you have to auto-discover. You have to understand everything that's in your network, all those cross-domains. Then you have to contextualize that. You have to bring in the threat intelligence, very deep understanding of threat intelligence, what the adversary is doing, and then mix that all together. Then you have to use artificial intelligence. You absolutely do. You have to get faster than them. They're using it against you. You've got to use it in defense. So you marry that up with the AI to pick out the needle in the haystack of needles that you really need to go against. And then you need to respond very, very quickly. Your defenders can't respond against everything. They have to respond against exactly what matters. So what are my recommendations and my key takeaways? The first one there is you have to secure your identity. If you don't secure your identity, you are leaving the door open for them to walk in. You have to defend your cloud. The cloud is where they're going to go right now because they understand that you're running an on-prem AD and an Entra ID in the cloud, and it's hybrid, and they can move back and forth, and it's very difficult to understand identities between on-prem and in the cloud, and they acknowledge that, and they recognize it. You also need to eliminate those cross-domain visibility gaps I talked about. You have to see what's going on with identity across your environment. You have to see what the user is doing on their endpoint. You have to understand what your cloud architecture looks like, how it's even named because that's what they're going to do, is to establish a cloud architecture inside yours just to operate freely. And then the last two kind of go together. You have to understand your adversary, who's going after you, because you can't focus on those 270 actors at one time, right? If you don't have a problem with an air threat, focus on the ground threat. So understand who is attacking you, and then what your vulnerabilities are, and then focus on patching and taking care of those things. Defend the most likely avenue of approach, because that's where you want to focus your resources. That's exactly where they're going to focus their resources. They're going to focus it on the seam, just like I did as an infantryman, that seam in the gap between first platoon and second platoon. They're going to do the same thing between your identity and your cloud and your endpoint. That's how they're going to go after you. Now I'll leave 2 QR codes up here if you want to go ahead and take a picture of them. If you don't, no problem at all. What they are, they're links to our global threat hunting report and the global threat report. All this information, except for those 4 attacks I told you in the beginning, which I did some research to find, but all of the information that I put out here today, they're in these 2 reports. You can see it all and expand on it. I really appreciate your time. I think I am 1 minute over. I apologize. But I'll take any questions later. We're at booth 70 something or other, 704, if you want to come by and talk. Thank you very much for your time, everybody.